The 1,000 Lee, in the grand casino of the American economy, there is one bet that never loses. It isn't real estate. It isn't tech stocks. It isn't cryptocurrency. It is the business of dying. Imagine a product that costs $1,000 per unit, not a luxury watch, not a share of high-flying stock, a single pill, a capsule of powder that costs pennies to manufacture, yet costs a fortune to swallow. Now, imagine that you have no choice but to buy it. If you don't buy it, you die, or at least that is what they tell you. You will liquidate your retirement account. You will mortgage your house. You will empty your children's college fund. You will hand over every cent of generational wealth you have built just to get your hands on this bottle. But what if I told you the bottle is a lie? What if I told you that the United States government, specifically the Food and Drug Administration, has created a loophole, a regulatory backdoor that allows pharmaceutical giants to sell cancer drugs that have never been proven to extend human life? We are talking about drugs that generate billions of dollars in revenue, drugs that are hailed as miracles on the nightly news, drugs that make executives wealthy beyond the dreams of avarice. But when the science is finally settled, when the real data comes in years later, we find out the truth. They didn't work. They didn't save anyone. And in some terrifying cases, they killed the patients faster than the cancer did. This is the story of the dangling approvals. It is the story of how the pharmaceutical industry hijacked a law meant to save AIDS patients and turned it into a machine for printing money. It is the story of how we commodified hope, and it starts, as most tragedies do, with good intentions. Chapter 1, The Road to Hell. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1988, the AIDS crisis. If you weren't there, you cannot truly understand the terror. It was a plague. It was a death sentence that moved with terrifying speed. Young men, 25, 30 years old, were wasting away in hospital beds. The FDA, the agency tasked with protecting us, was moving at the speed of bureaucracy. Their standard approval process took years. You had to run phase 1 for safety, phase 2 for dosage, phase 3 for efficacy. You had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the drug saved lives. By the time a drug cleared that hurdle, the patients waiting for it were already buried. The activists, groups like ACTUP, they declared war on the process. They stormed the National Institutes of Health. They shut down the Golden Gate Bridge. Their argument was morally unassailable. We are dying anyway. Give us the drugs. We don't care if the science isn't perfect yet. We have nothing to lose. The government blinked. They listened in 1990 to the FDA created a new pathway. It was called accelerated approval. This was the compromise. Under accelerated approval, a drug company didn't have to prove that a patient lived longer. That takes too long. Instead, they only had to prove that the drug had an effect on a surrogate endpoint. Remember that term, surrogate endpoint. It is a proxy, a stand in HIV. The surrogate endpoint was viral load. If a drug lowered the amount of virus in the blood, the FDA assumed it would save the patient's life. They didn't wait to see if the patient actually lived 10 years. They approved it immediately, and for HIV, it worked. It was a triumph. It saved a generation. But here is the rule of economics. If you create a shortcut, someone will find a way to exploit it. The pharmaceutical industry looked at this new highway. They looked at the lower bar for evidence, and they realized that this wasn't just for AIDS. They realized they could use this for the most profitable disease in human history, cancer. Chapter 2, The Surrogate Trap in the World of Cancer Drug Development. There is only one metric that truly matters to a patient. It is called OS, overall survival. It is a simple question. If I take this pill, will I live longer than if I don't? But proving overall survival is hard. It is expensive. It requires tracking thousands of people for 5, 7, maybe 10 years. And there is a high risk of failure. So the industry pivoted. They started using the accelerated approval pathway for cancer, and they swapped out overall survival for a surrogate endpoint called PFS, progression-free survival, or even simpler tumor response rate. Here is the trick. Here is the sleight of hand. They tell the FDA, look, our drug shrank the tumor on the X-ray, and the FDA says approved. But here is the medical reality that nobody puts in the brochure. Shrinking a tumor does not always mean the patient lives longer. You can shrink a tumor, but the cancer can still mutate, it can still spread, the drug can be so toxic that it damages the heart or the liver, killing the patient even as the tumor gets smaller. But the approval is granted, the drug launches, and the price is set. Let's look at a specific case. Let's look at Lartruvo, generic name olaratumab, manufactured by the giant Eli Lilly in 2016. The FDA granted Lartruvo accelerated approval for soft tissue sarcoma. This is a brutal, rare cancer. Patients were desperate. In a small, early study of only 133 people, Lartruvo seemed to be a miracle. It seemed to extend life by 11 months. 11 months. That's a lifetime. That's another Christmas. That's seeing a grandchild born. Based on that data, the FDA opened the gates. Eli Lilly priced Lartruvo at approximately $19,000 per month. $19,000. Wall Street cheered. Analysts predicted it would be a blockbuster, and the sales rolled in just over 2 years. Lartruvo generated more than $500 million in revenue, $500 million. But remember the deal with accelerated approval. The deal is we approve it now, but you must run a big confirmation trial to prove it really works. So Lilly ran the trial. It was called ANONCE. They enrolled hundreds of patients. They waited, and in 2019, the results came in. It failed. It didn't just miss the mark. It completely failed. The patients who took Lartruvo lived no longer than the patients who took the old, cheap chemotherapy, the 11-month survival benefit from the early study. It was a ghost, a statistical fluke, noise in the data. The drug was useless. Eli Lilly withdrew the drug. But here is the question that should keep you up at night. What happened to the $500 million? Did they refund the patients? Did they send checks back to the families of the dead? Did they reimburse Medicare? No, they kept it. The executives kept their bonuses. The shareholders kept their dividends. The company moved on to the next drug, and the patients, they were left with nothing but debt and false hope. Chapter 3, when hope turns to poison. Lartruvo was a tragedy because it didn't work. It was expensive water. But there is a darker category. There are the drugs that don't just fail to save you, they actively hurt you. Let's talk about Pepaxto, approved in 2020, one for multiple myeloma, a blood cancer. The manufacturer, Oncopeptides, showed the FDA that Pepaxto shrank tumors in about 28% of patients. That was enough. Accelerated approval granted, price tag, roughly $20,000 per treatment cycle. Once again, the money flowed. Once again, doctors prescribed it. But then came the confirmatory trial, the OCEAN study. And when the FDA looked at the data from the OCEAN study, they saw something that made their blood run cold. In the confirmatory trial, the patients taking Pepaxto had a higher death rate than the patients taking the standard care. Let me repeat that. The people paying $20,000 a month for the new cutting-edge drug were dying faster than the people taking the old drugs. The hazard ratio for overall survival was greater than 1. That is the statistician's way of saying this drug is dangerous. Now, you would think in a sane world, the company would immediately pull the drug. You would think they would issue a frantic apology. You would be wrong. Oncopeptides fought the FDA. They argued about the data. They tried to keep the drug on the market. They kept selling it while the bureaucrats held meetings. It took months of fighting before the drug was finally fully withdrawn from the US market. During those months, how many people were infused with that drug? How many families drained their savings for a treatment that was statistically likely to shorten their lives? This is the reality of the gold rush in oncology. The incentives are all wrong. The incentive is to rush a drug to market on the flimsiest possible data, charge a fortune, and then drag your feet on the proof. Because even if you have to withdraw it 3 years later, you have already made your billion. It is the perfect crime, and it is perfectly legal. Chapter 4, the dangling approvals. You might be thinking, well, surely the FDA forces them to do the confirmatory trials quickly, right? Wrong. This brings us to the phenomenon known as the dangling approval. This is the industry term for a drug that gets its accelerated approval. And then the company simply stalls. They delay the trial. They have trouble recruiting patients. They negotiate with the FDA for extensions. The Government Accountability Office, the GO, investigated this. They found that some drugs stay on the market for years, sometimes over a decade, without ever proving they actually work. They are dangling. And while they dangle, the cash register rings. Take the case of Abrance, a breast cancer drug made by Pfizer, a massive blockbuster, billions in sales. It got accelerated approval. But when the confirmatory trials for certain uses came in, they failed to show an overall survival benefit. But the drug is still a monster seller. The system is designed to be sticky. Once a drug is in the guidelines, once doctors are used to prescribing it, once Medicare is paying for it, it is incredibly hard to get it out. It's like a tick burrowing into the skin of the healthcare system. And who pays for this? You do. Taxpayers fund Medicare. Premiums fund private insurance. When Medicare pays $10,000 for a drug that doesn't work, that money comes out of the national pocket. It is a wealth transfer, a direct siphon from the American public to the shareholders of pharmaceutical companies. Chapter 5, the financial toxicity. There is a term that oncologists have started using in the last 10 years. They didn't learn it in medical school. They learned it in the clinic. It is called financial toxicity. We usually talk about toxicity in terms of biology, nausea, hair loss, liver damage, but financial toxicity is just as real. It is the side effect of bankruptcy. A study published in the American Journal of Medicine found that 42% of cancer patients deplete their entire life savings within 2 years of diagnosis. 42%. We have patients who are splitting their pills in half to make the prescription last longer, which makes the drug useless. We have patients who are choosing not to fill prescriptions so they can leave some money for their spouses when they die. We have created a system where you have to choose between your life and your legacy. And why? Why does a pill cost $1,000? The industry has a script. They have a rehearsed line they give to every politician, every journalist. Innovation. They say, R&D is expensive. We have to pay for the failures. If you cut our prices, we won't be able to invent the cures of tomorrow. It sounds reasonable. It plays on our fear. Don't touch the golden goose or you'll die of cancer. But let's look at the balance sheet. Let's look at where the money actually goes. If you look at the financial filings of the major pharmaceutical companies, you will see something interesting. They often spend more on sales and marketing than they do on research and development. They spend billions on TV commercials with slow motion footage of people running through fields. They spend billions on armies of sales, reps who buy lunch for doctors, and they spend billions on something else, stock buybacks. In the last decade, the largest drug companies spent hundreds of billions of dollars buying back their own stock to artificially inflate the share price. That is money that didn't go to R&D. It didn't go to lowering the price of insulin. It went to Wall Street. So when they tell you that the 1,000 pill is the cost of innovation, do not believe them. It is the cost of the dividend. It is the cost of the CEO's bonus package. It is the cost of a monopoly that has lost its moral compass. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. We are living in the golden age of biology, immunotherapy, CAR T cells, gene editing. We are curing things today that were death sentences 10 years ago. This is not an anti-science screed. This is a pro-science screed because real science demands proof. When we lower the bar for evidence, when we allow surrogate endpoints to replace living longer, we are not helping patients. We are exploiting them. We are filling the market with expensive, marginal drugs that crowd out the real innovation. If a company can make $1 billion on a mediocre drug that fails its confirmatory trial, why should they bet the farm on a moonshot cure? The low bar encourages mediocrity. It encourages the Me Too drugs. It encourages the 1,000 pill that does nothing. So what happens next? The FDA is trying to tighten the screws. They are starting to demand that the confirmatory trials be started before the approval is granted. That is a start, but the prices are still climbing. New gene therapies are launching at $2 million, $3 million per dose. And as long as we treat healthcare as a free market commodity, as long as we treat the desperate hope of a dying parent as a revenue stream, this will continue. You need to be aware, if you or someone you love is offered a new expensive cancer drug, ask the question, ask the doctor, is this fully approved? Or is this accelerated approval? Ask the doctor, does this extend overall survival, or does it just shrink the tumor on a scan? The answers might surprise you, and they might save you from a different kind of ruin. We want to believe that if it costs 10, it must be valuable. We want to believe that if the FDA stamped it, it must be a cure. But in the modern American medical system, belief is a dangerous thing. Skepticism is the only side effect they can't charge you for.